Get in between the scientists and their coffee. All right, so I was asked to provide a perspective and a little bit of a high-level overview about the so-called quote-unquote science perspective of the next steps on the moon. Now, I typically don't like to put up the artificial barriers between human exploration and science because what we really want is a continuum, a robust continuum of surface activities that enables commercial activity, enhances national security, and promotes scientific discovery, but they're all not mutually exclusive. So in 2017 and 2018, we had its busiest year in about 15 years, and we used the United States Lunar Exploration Roadmap as a springboard to perform a series of studies designed to take a comprehensive look at the current state of lunar exploration and lay the foundations for the future. We had the very successful Back to the Moon workshop in October 2017. We executed the Advancing Science of the Moon Special Action Team over the summer of 2017, the Next Steps on the Moon Special Action Team, the League ISEG Volatile Special Action Team number 2. I like the first one so much, they had the second one, and the Lunar Science for Landed Missions Workshop in January 2018. Taken together, these documents provide a cohesive framework for profound discovery. And let's go through what some of them said. Okay. So this hasn't really been brought up a lot in the context of the implementation of Presidential Space Policy Directive Number 1. Nevertheless, as we start to look at the details, the United States Lunar Exploration Roadmap, more or less all stuff we're discussing, is already in there. And so we can use that as a springboard very successfully. So this was developed at the request of the NASA Advisory Council over a 3-year period. It is the definitive plan to decisively enable lunar science, commercial activity, and human exploration. Surviving and operating through the lunar night is a key component of the Lunar Exploration Roadmap. Oh, and one of the other things. So I committed the meeting planning faux pas at having the same talk on consecutive days. So I'm going to talk about this tomorrow in the decadal session in a bit more detail. Today we're going to focus the topic on what is required from a science perspective to survive the lunar night. So anyway, the nighttime operations essential for sustained surface presence are called for explicitly by the Lunar Exploration Roadmap. And there's a number of relevant Lunar Exploration Roadmap investigations, which include astrophysics and heliophysics observations from the moon, a lunar geophysical network, a surface station to assess over a long duration of time the near-surface plasma environment and dust environment. The explicitly calls for the testing of surface fission power systems. Lee, it's in there already. And to test rechargeable energy storage technologies for fixed and mobile surface applications. So in 2007, in the context of the Vision for Space Exploration, NASA headquarters, the Associate Administrator for SND, commissioned the National Research Council to create the scientific context for the exploration of the Moon Report. It was designed to provide guidance on the science enabled by the Vision for Space Exploration. NASA needs, the idea was to provide a comprehensive, well-validated, and prioritized set of scientific research objectives for lunar exploration. The U.S. Lunar Exploration Roadmap essentially adopted the skin prioritization and objectives for the science component of the LEO. It's incorporated by reference in that. Now these are the scientific priorities from the 2007 NRC report. Understanding the bombardment history of the inner solar system. Understand the structure and composition of the lunar interior. Understand the diversity of lunar crustal rocks. Understand the volatile environment, the distribution and metal extent of volatiles at the lunar poles. Understand lunar volcanism. Understand the impact Understand the impact process on planetary scales using the moon as a laboratory. Understand understand regolith processes in space weathering on anhydrous airless bodies. And understand the dust environment in lunar and the moon's surface-bound exosphere. And these are the top 11 goals called out by the NRC report. And I took the liberty, the ones highlighted in teal are the ones where you really do need the capability to survive and operate through the lunar night. So understanding the composition and distribution of polar volatiles almost explicitly depends on nighttime survival because you need to understand the lateral distribution and heterogeneity of the volatile environment at the lunar polar regions. Understanding the thickness of the crust and the variability of the crust depends on a long-lived geophysical network. Similar to what we had on Apollo, except I would trust that this time we'll put one on the far side also. Understand the stratification of the mantle also requires a geophysical network. Measure the lunar atmosphere over long periods of time. Is there really dust transport? There is conflicting physical evidence on this. What is the electrostatic environment along the terminator? These are important questions that require essentially you to operate through the lunar night. What is the size, composition, and current state of the core? So it became clear a couple years ago, or last year, to PSD that the moon was going to be coming back in focus. So the Advancing Science of the Moon Special Action Team was requested by Jim Green at the Planetary Science Division. And the goal was to evaluate the progress on lunar science goals since the 2007 NRC report. We were supposed to consider concepts related to science implementation and secondary science opportunities outlined in the original report, and note any new lunar science concepts that have become evident since 2007. Each section ends with a concise summary of the progress that is needed. We also made no effort to reprioritize. It was just too rich too far for this group. However, this was the largest and most complicated activity League had ever done. We brought in 30 people, the best lunar scientists in the world, and although there is a perception out there that League is just people sitting in a room expressing their opinions to one another and walking and writing it down, we actually make an honest effort to balance these institutional conflicts and make sure we have a balanced perspective that is designed to essentially represent an authoritative community consensus. So the outcomes, so I'm going to talk about all this tomorrow. So just, believe me, you've got a lot more of this coming tomorrow. But the concepts and goals outlined in the report, the 2007 report, remain relevant even after a decade of progress in lunar science. All goals, however, had at least some progress, but none were quote-unquote done. There have been new concepts that have emerged, and those were understanding the lunar water cycle. So keep in mind the NRC report 2007 was written before LRO got to the moon. And while the Japanese were still processing and digesting the results from their spacecraft, and Chandrayaan hadn't got to the moon yet either. So in many respects, the report offers an interesting snapshot into what we thought. The 2007 report is a snapshot into what we thought about the moon about a decade. And now, after a decade of progress, we identified three sort of new concepts that none of which really fit cleanly into the existing framework of the NRC report. That is, understand the quote-unquote lunar water cycle, how hydroxyl moves as a function of time. Doing that will require the capabilities to survive the lunar night. Understand the origin of the moon, and specifically understand how the moon's interior is so enriched in volatiles. We had previously, or by so enriched, I mean it's not bone dry. There's now some volatiles in the interior, and that actually causes problems for models of lunar formation. But I resolutely maintain that if an observation conflicts with a theoretical model, one ought to fix the theoretical model. So this is an interesting scenario to be in. And we also need to understand lunar tectonism. So that LRO has uncovered very compelling evidence that the moon is still tectonically active. We've uncovered hundreds of lobate scarps all across the face of the moon, and these are important destinations for future robotic and human exploration. Finally, science from the moon has enormous potential for astrophysics and heliophysics. That was true in 2007 and it remains true now. Landed missions are therefore required to do and execute the program and figure out these questions called out by the 2007 report. We have to get back to the lunar surface. Orbit, there are still important advances that can be made from orbit, but we've got to get our boots dirty. We need humans and we need robots on the surface of the moon as quickly as possible. So there is lots of work left to do. As part of the ASMSAT activity, we were also asked to consider future missions, and it was pretty funny for me, as the person who led the activity, that we are essentially a very self-calibrating group, apparently as lunar scientists. We're not good at asking for what we really want. So what happened was, after 8 years of having the moon be blacklisted, essentially, we were all very afraid to go, hey, we want missions. So we actually proposed an incredibly low-cost program, essentially, as part of this series of we kept an eye on the budget, and we didn't really propose anything that was too wild. The goal of this particular set was to determine on-ramps for commercial involvement. We looked at near-term options that could be feasibly carried out in the next 5 years. And we attempted to break up the candidate missions into various capability bins, and one of them was explicitly called out was nighttime survival. So we decided to say, okay, here's the goal we want to achieve, and then here's 5 ways of escalating complexity you could address that partially or whole. We did not attempt to prioritize these missions, but this group was a subset of the ASM SAT group and was influenced by the deliberations of the first activity. So we just gone through days of intensive discussions of what were the most important things to do on the lunar surface in the near term, and this is what came out of that activity. They were understand lunar magnetic anomalies, understand the origin and age of the quote-unquote irregular Mare patches, which are interesting volcanic features on the moon, understand the structure of the lunar interior, understand the composition, physical state, form, distribution, and context of volatiles for science and exploration purposes, and understand the bombardment history of the inner solar system. And as you looked across all of these high priority candidate mission types, there were some cross-cutting things that came to the surface. And one of them was that there was a lot of desires for multiple long-lived rovers capable of nighttime survival, and the emplacement of surface networks with nighttime survival capabilities. And finally, we had the Lunar Science for Landed Missions workshop in early 2018, which produced a nice figure, but I'm choosing to use the famous Clyde Neal figure instead because it's very colorful, and Clyde is sitting right in front of me. And the point of this particular figure is to demonstrate that there are a lot of places on the moon where you can make fundamental science advances for the entire solar system. And in any given scenario, unless you're going to the poles, and even if you're going to the poles, you're going to have to engage in activities that require you to survive in the lunar night. So as one example of what something could look like, so this is some work we've done recently trying to figure out how you would operate a rover to understand lunar volcanism. These are Isis and Osiris, 2 very small cones, not so far away from the Apollo 11 landing site. And in this scenario, this is a relatively simple, straightforward mission that would still require about 4 weeks surface time. So you'd have to operate through a day-night cycle. You'd start at Isis, you'd explore that, you'd drive off of Isis, you'd look at what kind of scatter cone it is, and then you'd proceed to Osiris and do the same kind of activity. That's a relatively simple, straightforward mission. And as you move farther, there are other locations on the moon where these sorts of activities become significantly more complicated. The Titan Domes, the Marius Hills, the Aristarchus Plateau. To do the science we want to do on the moon requires nighttime survival. So I would point out a couple of things here. First of all, surviving and operating through the lunar night is critical for accomplishing key science and exploration objectives. This has been amply documented numerous times by the community over the past decade, most recently last year, 3 times. We need a long-lived, uncrewed rover or a series of rovers to fully address some of these high-priority science concepts, and that rover would have to survive the lunar night. Stationary geophysical network comes up a lot as the stationary lunar exosphere analysis station and astrophysics observatory. So that's the science perspective, and I think I will take any questions you might have at this time. Great, everybody agrees. So I think Ben is going to be up next, so he should probably start with longer.
Oh, Barbara's going to ask me a question.
Oh, Barbara's asking a question. Okay, great.
Sam, I noticed you don't have a sample return up there, and that might be a casualty of us not asking for really what we want.
Yes.
What benefits do you think surviving the night would have for a sample return mission, outreach mission? I think of as having very quick surface activity.
Well, it depends on how you do it. If you went the route of that we seem to be going down for the Mars activity, where you have a rover that's actually collecting the samples, and you're doing it over a large geographic expanse, by definition, the rover would have to do that every night. A stationary sample return mission, I don't know. The Russians did that very successfully in only 3 Earth days when they did it in the 70s, and there's no scenario where I think a stationary mission would have to survive the night, unless the spacecraft itself will was going to act as a node in a long geophysical network.
Sure, I think I agree with you in terms of the mechanics, but we know for those samples that were collected by the missions, we didn't have great geologic context for them until LRO, right? And so I think having some of these kinds of assets on a lander that had the return samples could give you the context
Oh, sure.
for those samples. So I think you could
Great one.
easily add
We could add
sample
sample
return.
return. Yeah, okay. We'll do that for tomorrow's talk.
I didn't hear too much about the commercial lunar payload system. Is that something that is in the back of your mind? Is that something that's a vehicle that you could use to put some of these missions?
Well, all of these are implementation. First of all, again, we didn't actually talk about the implementation here. So one of the on-ramps that was identified, in theory, could be, these missions could fly to the moon. We don't really care how it gets there.